In this video, I'm going to show you how to seduce anyone and effortlessly attract beautiful women using the CIA's forbidden chaos magic manual. This is a secret internal memo that was first released on the 9th of June 1983. It was written for the Department of Defense by a Lieutenant Colonel of Army Intelligence named Wayne McDonnell. It's called Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process. And today, it's available to read right now on the CIA website, as it was declassified in 2003. And this document is basically a manual for how to do magic. It is very, very complex and hard to follow in parts because it brings in all sorts of concepts from quantum physics that are pretty baffling if you don't have a background in the hard sciences. But essentially, this document gives a scientific rationale for how and why it is possible to influence external reality with your thoughts. In other words, what the black magician Aleister Crowley referred to as magic, the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. And so in this video, I'm going to show you how to use this CIA declassified magic spell to seduce beautiful women, to get the girl of your dreams, attract your ideal sexual partner, to get a harem, to get a girlfriend, to get 10 girlfriends, whatever you want. The most important qualification, as we'll see, is that it must be something you really desire. Meaning, this technique will work for you, and it's worked for me. I actually use this to attract the girl I'm with right now, Big Titty Goth GF. You can see some pictures of us together on screen now. I also use this technique to get a couple other girls, fun situations, threesomes, various other cool things that have happened to me over the years. But like I said, this is only going to work if it's something you really, really want. So we'll get to that in a second. But first of all, some background on this document. The reason that this very strange document even exists at all is that in the 1970s, the US government started doing research on paranormal phenomena like remote viewing, telepathy, telekinesis, with a focus on how they could use it to win the Cold War. This was called the Stargate Project. You might have heard of it. And as part of this project, they enlisted the help of this man, Robert Monroe, and his foundation, the Monroe Institute. So Robert Monroe was what's called a remote viewer. In other words, he was purportedly able to leave his physical body at will and use his consciousness, or some would say his astral body, to go anywhere he wanted on Earth and to see anything he wanted. He wrote some books about this, like Journeys Out of the Body, which I strongly recommend you read. It's pretty much the best book about astral projection and communicating with entities in other dimensions that you'll find. And his follow-up books are even better. Now, obviously, the US government wasn't that interested in talking to aliens or astral travel. They were very interested in remote viewing, the ability for a human being to use their mind to travel far distances on Earth and find secrets in foreign countries. Obviously, assuming that is possible, it would have enormous applications for spying and, covert operations. And so as part of the Stargate project, they used their massive military budget to scoop up guys like Robert Monroe and basically anyone who claimed to have these psychic powers and to test them and to see if they're legit. And Robert Monroe was one of these guys who it became clear obviously had real powers. And not just that, but Monroe claimed to be able to teach these powers to other people. He had a whole system for developing psychic powers, for remote viewing, being able to leave your body at will, etc. He called it the Gateway Process. And so this document we're talking about today, declassified by the CIA, this was, just as the title indicates, the US Army's assessment and analysis of the Gateway Process. So in other words, these Army officers and intelligence people had gone through this. They'd let Robert Monroe's people train them. They had evidently experienced very dramatic results, because they don't write it off as a bunch of bullshit like you might expect. On the contrary, they basically say this works. And so most of this document is really this one Army intelligence officer's heroic attempt to try to find a scientific, non-woo-woo, non-spiritual rationale for why these remote viewing techniques work, because evidently they did. Now, there's a lot of controversy online about this. People will tell you that remote viewing isn't real, it's a pseudoscience, etc. They'll say the Army dropped it in the end because they found it didn't work or it wasn't reliable. And I really don't care. I'm not trying to get into the weeds of that debate. You can read about it and form your own conclusions. Like I said, for remote viewing, astral projection, all that stuff, if you're interested, I would strongly recommend starting with Robert Monroe's book, Journeys Out of the Body, and then reading the follow-up books. I've gifted those books to more people than anything else. But this video is not about that. It's not about remote viewing or astral projection. What I want to talk about today is one particular paragraph in this leaked CIA document, and this is about magic, strictly defined, influencing external reality with your mind, causing change to occur in the physical world in accordance with your inner will and intention. And this document, Assessment and Analysis of the Gateway Process, almost as an aside, on page 20, it provides one of the best and most concise descriptions of what magic is and how to do it that I've ever seen. It's a better summary and description of how to do magic than I've read about in just about any occult text that I've ever read. And so I put the paragraph on screen here. And this is referring to something the Monroe Institute psychics taught these military people along with remote viewing. It's a technique they call patterning. Although these days, many people would call this manifestation or, the law of attraction. What this actually is magic, and it's chaos magic specifically. And I'll get more into that in a second. But anyway, here's what this CIA document says. And again, I'm not making this up. You can go read this on the CIA's own website right now. Patterning. This technique involves the use of consciousness to achieve desired objectives in the physical, emotional, or intellectual sphere. It involves concentrating on the desired objective while in a focus 12 state. Extension of the individual's perception of that objective into the whole expanded consciousness, and its projection into the universe with the intention that the desired objective is already a matter of established achievement, destined to be realized within the time frame specified. This method is based on the belief that the thought patterns generated by our consciousness in a state of expanded awareness create holograms, which represent the situation we desire to bring about, and in so doing, establish the basis for actual realization of that goal. Once the thought-generated hologram of the sought-after objective is established in the universe, it becomes an aspect of reality which interacts with the universal hologram to bring about the desired objective, which might not, under other circumstances, ever occur. Now, I know this is very hard to follow. I'm going to break this down and explain it more in a second. But anyway, it goes on. In other words, the technique of patterning, aka chaos magic, recognizes the fact that since consciousness is the source of all reality, our thoughts have the power to influence the development of reality in time-space as it applies to us if those thoughts can be projected with adequate intensity. Now, it issues a warning on this before we start getting too excited. It says, however, the more complicated the objective sought and the more radically it departs from our current reality, the more time the universal hologram will need to reorient our reality sphere to accommodate our desires. Monroe trainers caution against attempting to force the pace of this process because the individual could succeed in dislocating his existing reality with drastic consequences. Okay, so there's obviously a lot there, and before showing you how to actually do this in practice, the best way I've found to do it, I just want to unpack some of these ideas here because it is important to get a general grasp of the gist of what he means here before you jump into trying this. Now, I'm going to give you the 101 intro to this, the version for cards for babies. Like I said, if you read the full document here, it is actually very, very complex. I've read this document half a dozen times since I first discovered it a few years back, and I still can't make heads or tails of 70% of this. It gets into quantum physics, neuroscience, holographic theory of the universe, holonomic brain theory, Carl Pribram, David Bohm, and I'm not going to get heavy into the science here because quite frankly, I'm really not qualified to even begin to evaluate this. I don't have a hard sciences background, and this was also written a long time ago, over 40 years ago now. And so what was current consensus and trendy in science then may no longer even apply. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm not qualified at all to evaluate the scientific claims being made here. If you're interested in that stuff, read the document yourself. But what I'm going to do here is just give you a very, very general, simplified model of the gist of what he's saying here. And what it all boils down to is this line, probably the most important line in the whole document. And again, it's worth just reflecting on the fact that this is an official US government document. It's not some psychic crank. It's not some gypsy lady. This is a lieutenant colonel of military intelligence writing this as part of a secret government program. So as it says, since consciousness is the source of all reality, then our thoughts have the power to influence the development of that reality. Consciousness is the source of reality. What does that mean? Now, this idea is actually very ancient. You will find it in Buddhism, in yoga, Vedanta. You'll even find Jesus suggesting something to this effect in the Secret Gospel of Thomas. Basically, what's being said here, what's being suggested is the opposite of how we normally tend to think of things. We normally assume matter is the most fundamental thing in the universe. We assume that physical matter came first, gases and rocks and minerals and water and things like that. And then we assume that, slowly, gradually, over time, complex organisms emerged. And then finally, billions millions of years later, consciousness finally appears, almost as a kind of accident. But the paradigm suggested in this CIA document turns this on its head. What it's saying is, although that may all be true to some extent, what if it's actually upside down? What if consciousness is actually more fundamental than matter? What if consciousness itself came first? And what if consciousness then created and generated matter, and perhaps is still generating it? And this is not as crazy as it might sound. A number of very important physicists have actually entertained this idea and still do so, because for some of them at least, it seemed to be the only way to explain some of the weirder things they observed going on with quantum physics, such as the famous observer effect. And this is where essentially observing a physical process changes that process. So in some weird way, consciousness and matter appear to be intimately connected. They're not separate as was always assumed as part of what's called Cartesian duality, the idea that mind and matter are two separate things and can't really interact. So rather than consciousness being like this kind of ghost in the machine, consciousness is what's real. Consciousness is what's primary and fundamental, and matter, space, and time are the illusion. And again, this is nothing new to a Buddhist or a Hindu yogi, but it finds a lot of support in the statements of certain famous quantum physicists such as Max Planck, for example, the founder of quantum theory. He said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness." Erwin Schrödinger, another famous physicist and founder of quantum theory, said, "The external world and consciousness are one and the same thing." He said elsewhere, "Although I think that life may be the result of an accident, I do not think that of consciousness. Consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms, for consciousness is absolutely fundamental. It cannot be accounted for in terms of anything else." Schrödinger got heavy into Vedanta and the old Indian texts like the Upanishads. He said elsewhere that multiplicity is only apparent. In truth, there is only one mind. So in other words, not only is consciousness primary and fundamental, but there is only really one consciousness that we all are a part of. But our separation is an illusion. Now, I'm going to get into how this all relates to how to actually do this in a second, but there's one other big concept you kind of have to understand from this document. The other point which this document makes is that both physical matter and consciousness or thoughts are really just energy. Meaning, if you break things down to their smallest components, there is no such thing as solid matter in the sense we tend to think about. And this is important to understand because otherwise it can be very difficult to wrap your head around the idea that your thoughts can influence physical reality. But actually, when you get into the physics of, well, okay, what is reality? What is matter? What are physical objects? It's not really as solid as we tend to think it is. So as the leaked CIA document explains on page 7, the first point which needs to be made is that the two terms, matter and energy, tend to be misleading if taken to indicate two distinctly different states of existence in the physical world as we know it. Indeed, if the term matter is taken to mean solid substance as opposed to energy, which is understood to mean a force of some kind, then the use of the term matter is entirely misleading. Science now knows that both the electrons which spin in the energy field located around the nucleus of the atom and the nucleus itself are made up of nothing more than oscillating energy grids. Solid matter, in the strict construction of the term, simply does not exist. Rather, atomic structure is composed of oscillating energy grids, surrounded by other oscillating energy grids, which orbit at extraordinarily high speeds. The point to be made is that the entire human being, brain, consciousness and all, is, like the universe which surrounds him, nothing more or less than an extraordinarily complex system of energy fields. The so-called states of matter are actually just variances in the state of energy. So the bottom line here, the important thing to take away from this is that this solid-seeming world we live in is really a kind of illusion. All so-called physical matter is really just a system of energy fields interacting with other energy fields. And the point here, as far as chaos magic is concerned, as far as doing your will is concerned, is that your consciousness is an energy field, matter is also an energy field. And so it's not exactly hard to imagine how these two things might actually interact and be influenced by each other a great deal more than we tend to suspect. You know, if it's all just energy, which it is, then why shouldn't energy be able to affect energy? Your thoughts, your emotions, your mental activity is an energy field. Everything physical is also an energy field. Now, is it really so inconceivable that one energy field should not have an effect on another? Well, this military intelligence report says explicitly that it does. Your thoughts can influence reality. Magic is real, in other words. And there are good reasons to think that all human beings have the potential to unlock magical or seemingly supernatural powers. And I think personally that this represents the next stage of human evolution, actually. Maybe not for 50 years, maybe not for 100, but I think we will reach a point eventually where the men who don't develop these powers will be left behind, so to speak. They won't mate as much as the men who have them. And that would begin to affect evolution, obviously. And if you think about it, it's actually not that inconceivable. I mean, does having psychic powers, does having telepathic powers give you a sexual advantage with women? Does that give you an edge in getting sex? Well, yeah, of course it does, assuming those powers exist. And so, over time, hundreds or thousands of years of evolution, if men develop these powers, and if they even give a slight advantage in mating, which I think it's reasonable to assume they would, then by the completely normal process of Darwinian evolution and natural selection, we could evolve into something more like gods, where, all humans are eventually psychic, all humans are telepathic, all humans eventually have magical powers and abilities. And so that's sort of the aim I'm actually trying to accomplish here in this channel. It's hastening that situation in which we evolve as a species to become magical. And sex is actually a big part of that. Because if you think about it, what's called sexual selection, in other words, which men women choose to mate with, that is the engine that drives evolution. So, not to get too off the point here, I know I'm on a tangent with this, but guys sometimes criticize me in the comments like, well, why can't you just talk about the occult stuff, the esoteric stuff? Why do you always have to bring it back to girls and sex and cold approach? Well, what do you think drives evolution? It's sex. It's precisely this. Which men women want and desire and choose to have sex with and produce offspring with, and which men they do not choose. So what we are doing here is altering the gene pool. Every time you play the game, you are altering the gene pool, potentially. If you become a great hermit wizard or a monk and go live in the woods, I don't really care about that. But if you become that great wizard and then have children, ideally a lot of children, we may in time be able to alter the course of human evolution. So anyway, that is a basic overview of the theory here. The theory of magic that is presented in this CIA document. The bottom line is that since consciousness is the source of all reality, your thoughts can therefore influence the development of reality. What I want to do now is get into the technique of how to actually do this in practice, because this document does give us a very interesting technique based on the gateway process. And I'm going to talk here about how to use this specifically to get sex, to attract girls, to seduce the type of woman you want. You can also use this to manifest other things like money, freedom, certain lifestyle or whatever. But I'm just going to focus this specifically on using it to get girls because, like I said, this has worked for me at least very, very well in that specific domain. So this is really a chaos magic technique. That's basically what it is. And I'll get more into that in a second. But first of all, just to refresh us here on the core idea, the core technique, as it says, patterning is the use of consciousness to achieve desired objectives in the physical world. And this involves, number 1, concentration on the desired objective. Number 2, while in a focus 12 state. We'll explain what that means in a second. Number 3, with the intention that the desired objective is already a matter of established achievement, destined to be realized in the time specified. So there's 3 core elements there, 3 fundamental parts of this you've got to understand and master to do this technique. Now, what do these mean? Number 1, concentrate on the desired objective. This is very important, and you need to decide on this in advance. You need to decide what you want, and you need to have a very clear idea of it. We're going to get more into that in a second. Number 2, do this while you're in a focus 12 state. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, this is terminology from the Monroe Institute. They talk about focus 1, focus 10, focus 12, focus 15, and so forth. To simplify this, focus 12 basically just means a very, very relaxed state. You need to be lying down. You need to relax your whole body, one body part at a time. If you've ever done hypnosis, you'll know that this relaxation is the key to getting into a hypnotic trance. And that's basically what focus 12 is. It's a hypnotic trance. And again, I'll get more into how you do that in a second. But number 3, though, this is the most important element by far. While you're in focus 12, you need to concentrate on the desired objective and project it into the universe with the intention that the desired objective is already a matter of established achievement. Now, that's the core line here for doing this technique. And if you're familiar with any other material on manifestation, like Neville Goddard, for instance, you'll know he says the same thing. You'll even learn this from Jesus in the Bible, as Jesus says, "Whatsoever you ask for in prayer, Believe that you have received it and it will be yours. Believe you have received it. So the CIA document is saying the same thing in slightly more technical language. And like I said, there's a book on this by Neville Goddard called Feeling is the Secret. And the idea is when you're visualizing something you want, when you're manifesting, as it's called, the whole key to this is generating the feeling in yourself while you visualize the thing you want that you already have the thing. You know, it's already yours. It's already been achieved. So for example, if you're praying to God for your dream job, which you don't have, instead of it being, like, please give me the job, God, like I want it so bad, it's more like, thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving me my dream job. I'm so grateful to you for bestowing such a generous blessing on me. And it's kind of a silly example, but it demonstrates the difference in mindset here. So you need to cultivate the feeling that the desired objective has already been achieved. And this is also why I've said this is chaos magic. Not just any magic, but it's chaos magic specifically. Because chaos magic is precisely this magic of belief, of using belief to manipulate the fabric of reality. I made a video about this you can watch later. It's called How to Make Girls Beg You for Sex Using Chaos Magic. A lot of people really liked it. I'm going to briefly quote from that video here just to explain the basic concept. Chaos magic teaches that the essence of magic is that perceptions are conditioned by beliefs, and that the world as we perceive it can be changed by deliberately changing those beliefs. Chaos magicians consequently treat belief as a tool, often creating their own idiosyncratic magical systems and blending different disciplines. Chaos magic rejects the existence of absolute truth and views all occult systems as arbitrary symbol systems that are only effective because you believe in them. Its central defining tenet is the idea that belief is a tool for achieving effects. Different magical systems like Kabbalah, astrology, etc. are treated as maps or symbolic constructs that can be manipulated to achieve certain ends, but that have no absolute or objective truth value in themselves. Chaos magic's rejection of all fixed models of reality reflects one of its central tenets. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. This was a maxim attributed to Hassan-i Saba, the notorious medieval Islamic warlord, mystic, and founder of the Order of the Assassins, or Hashashim. Furthermore, chaos magicians utilize trance states as a means of attaining an unmediated experience of the inchoate and indeterministic ground of being known as chaos. Within trance, chaos magicians believe that they are able to transform both their perception and the substance of the world by magically reshaping the chaos force in accordance with their own desires. So basically, chaos magic is the magic of belief. It's about changing your beliefs in order to achieve altered states of consciousness. Within these altered states, you can then change and manipulate reality to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the skill of the practitioner, which again is possible because following the theory of Maya, reality itself is an illusion created by consciousness. Reality is made not of matter, but of beliefs. So in a second, I'm going to reveal the 4 steps to seducing anyone and attracting your dream girl using this CIA chaos magic technique. Before I get to that, make sure you grab this free book I'm offering. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Making Beautiful Women Approach You, no matter your looks, age, or money. And you can get this free right now on my website. Just click the link in the description below. And in this book, I'm going to show you 5 easy tricks to make beautiful women approach you for sex, no matter your looks, age, or money. Since I started using this, I typically get approached by 2 to 3 girls a night, almost every night I go out. And I am not a good looking guy. I'm funny looking with a hook nose, a weak chin, acne scars. I'm balding. I'm in my 30s, which these days young people see as being like a senior citizen. But despite this, I get approached by hot young girls in their early 20s regularly. The last few girls I had one night stands with were all beautiful and they all approached me first. And if you want to learn how to do this, and you should, I show you exactly how in this free book that I'm giving away. So pause the video now, click the link in the description, and then you'll be taken to my website. Just enter your name and email, and I'll send you this book for free right now. You'll also be subscribed to my newsletter with fresh new content from me almost every single day on dating, game, attraction, the occult, mind control. If you like my videos here, the newsletter is even better. It's where I post all my best stuff, so go subscribe to that right now. Click the link below, and when you do that, you're also going to get this free book as a complimentary gift for signing up. All right, now back to the video. How to seduce anyone using the CIA's forbidden chaos magic manual. So I've showed you the theory and the core concepts of how this manifestation technique works and why it works. What I want to get into now is the nitty gritty, the step-by-step detail of how to actually do this. I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to walk you through it every step of the way. And it really comes down to 4 simple steps. So step 1 is formulate your desired objective. There's a lot of different kinds of desires or wishes you can focus on, but it's very important to decide in advance what it is that you actually want. Now, we're talking about seduction and attracting women, and so within that domain, there's two general types of desires you can focus on. There's a her focus or there's an I focus, a me focus. A her focus would be something like, I want to have sex with Katie, the secretary from my office. So you're imagining a specific girl, a real girl, and you want that specific girl. Another example of a her focus might be more abstract. There might not be a specific girl you actually know who you want, but you want to attract a type of girl. Like it could be, I want a girl who's like Kate Hudson in the movie Almost Famous, or I want a manic pixie dream girl, whatever it is. Those are all her focused objectives. You're not really thinking about yourself. You're thinking of a specific girl or type of girl that you want. There's also I focused objectives. Now, this might be something like, I want to be extremely attractive and magnetic to women, to all women in general. Everywhere I go, I just can't stop getting hit on by blonde, athletic, gym bunny girls with bubble butts. This is a good one to play with because you can turn a her focus into a me focus. So instead of it being, I want a beautiful, tall brunette girl with long legs, you could make it into, I am extremely attractive to beautiful brunettes with long legs. Or, wherever I go, I can't stop getting hit on by beautiful, long-legged brunettes. Now, any of these can work well. There are no right or wrong answers here. The most important part is that it's got to be something you strongly desire. Something you really yearn for. Basically, the main thing you're looking for when you formulate your desired objective is this something you can really fantasize about? Is this a fantasy you could really get lost in? Is this thing you want something that you could happily daydream about for a long period of time? That's what you're looking for. And this is actually kind of tricky for some guys because we're so conditioned not to fantasize, to be practical, don't daydream. And I was like that for a long time. And if you're like I was, then to do this technique properly, you actually have to get more in touch with your own fantasies. You have to get more in touch with that part of your mind which enjoys fantasizing, which can yearn for something. And I don't mean fantasizing in a sexual way. I don't mean like this hyper-focused gooner type of fantasy of, imagining what you want to do sexually to a girl's body parts. I mean something closer to that kind of romantic fantasizing or yearning that you might have done when you were a teenager or, just hitting puberty. Like when you think back to those times, you might have seen a movie and there was a girl in that movie who, for whatever reason, you just couldn't stop thinking about her. Or maybe there was a girl in your class and you would fantasize about being with her, but it wasn't really sexual yet. So you need to get back in touch with that. And I find movies can help with this. Like I said, think back to when you were a teenager or just going through puberty. Were there any movies or books or TV shows or anything like that back then which had a girl in them who you would have said like, that's my ideal girl. Like that's exactly what I want. If you make a list of movies like that, that can be a very good way to begin to get back in touch with this. Now, another situation might be that you have a specific girl not a fictional character or an ideal, but a real girl who maybe you see her around or whatever, and you want to get her specifically. And a lot of people in the manifestation world will tell you that you shouldn't try to manifest a specific person. They'll say it usually doesn't work. And the reason for that is kind of obvious when you think it through. If consciousness can influence reality and you're conscious and therefore you have this power, well, that's all well and good when it comes to influencing things that only really affect you. But when you're trying to essentially impose your will on another person, if they don't want for themselves what you want for them, then obviously you're coming up against the resistance of their consciousness. And so people who try to manifest a specific person, they often fail. Which again makes sense within the internal logic of this because, why would you be able to impose your will on them? It's not like they're machines. It's not like they're inanimate matter. They're also conscious. And so they also have some manner of control over directing their own reality. And so on this basis, a lot of manifestation people say, don't try to manifest a specific person. And I actually think that's wrong. I actually think that you should try to visualize and manifest a specific girl if you want to, because what will happen is either you'll get that girl, or if she really doesn't want to be with you, if, God has other plans for her, what may happen is that by focusing that energy on that inner ideal, that extremely desirable outcome, you may not get her specifically, but you may get someone like her. And that's happened to me. And so if there is a specific woman you want, if you really, really desire her and no one else, use that energy. Don't let it go to waste. Use that fantasy power. channel it. And then either you'll get her or you might get someone like her. And people are very impatient with this. They want it to work right away, and it might not work right away. I mean, that's the thing. It might not work in a year. It might not even work in 2 years. But in my experience, you usually do get what you wanted eventually. The tricky part is that by then, you might not even want it that much anymore. And so the key thing is to focus on something that is really deeply, genuinely desirable to you, not just a passing fancy or a whim. Okay, now step 2 is turn the desired objective into an image or images. And this is pretty self-explanatory. In the first part, you probably already did this to some extent, but just in case you didn't, it's important to outline this in advance. You don't want to be trying to figure this out while you're in trance. It will take you out of it. So, if it's a particular girl you want, you might think of a scene of you and her together. Maybe she's laying down next to you in bed, whatever it is. That can be a good one because you're going to be laying down as you do this, so it's easy to visualize. Or if your goal is me focused, if it's something like, I want to be attractive to all women, I want to be filled with a mysterious, seductive energy that makes them attracted to me wherever I go. Obviously, that's kind of an abstract statement, so turn it into a tangible image. What would that look like if it were true? If you were to watch a movie of yourself where that statement was true, what would you be seeing on the screen? You might imagine yourself walking down the street and having beautiful girls coming up to you, approaching you, asking you for a date, groping you, touching you. And don't be realistic here. Make it fantastical, make it as intensely desirable to you as possible. That's the key. Do not hold back here. Don't be restrained. Don't take an attitude of like, oh, well, that would never happen. That's not realistic. You need to go for fantasy. The key here is it's got to activate enough emotion in you to really give the desired thought some force, to project into the universe, as it were. Okay, now step 3 is to relax your physical body and induce a hypnotic trance, or what the document calls, following the Monroe Institute terminology, a focus 12 state. Now, this is really important, okay? So pay attention here because this is really the key to the whole process. The state you're in when you do this is the most important element by far. This will not work if you do it in your normal, everyday state of consciousness. To make magic or manifestation effective, you need to access an altered state of consciousness. And you do this by putting yourself into a hypnotic trance. All magic is fundamentally about hypnosis. All the ceremonies, the rituals, invoking gods, etc. It's all really about inducing hypnosis. And when you realize that, then you don't really need to do the rituals. You don't need to do the ceremonies. What you need to focus on primarily is generating the altered state of consciousness. Now, just to clarify here, when I say you need to induce a hypnotic trance, I'm talking about a state in which your body is completely relaxed and your mind is also deeply relaxed and fully receptive and what's called suggestible. So how do you put yourself into hypnosis? It's very simple, actually. The key is mainly just in relaxing your physical body. When the body is relaxed, when you're not clenching, when you're not tensed up, the mind naturally follows. The mind becomes relaxed, supple, pliant, receptive. And this happens to be the ideal state for accomplishing or experiencing magical effects. You've got to be relaxed.
You got to stay relaxed.
And that's really all I mean by a hypnotic trance. It's not like blacking out or going unconscious or becoming a zombie or something. It's really quite an ordinary state of mind, which we actually do experience all the time. In daily life, we're always going into and out of trances. If you're absorbed in a movie or book, you're in a hypnotic trance, as long as the movie's any good at least. When you're daydreaming, you're in a trance. When you're scrolling your phone, you're in a trance. Driving is a trance. Writing is a trance. Gaming is a trance. All these things are different kinds of trance states. So understand, trance is normal. Trance is natural. Getting into a hypnotic trance is not some kind of alien or exotic thing that you've never done before. You actually do it all the time. The only difference here is you're going to learn how to induce this state in yourself deliberately. And once you can do that, you're then going to discover how to deepen it, how to make it much, much deeper, how to go under much deeper than you normally do or have ever done before. And this is the key. This is absolutely vital to doing any kind of magic, but particularly to doing chaos magic specifically. Because in chaos magic, you don't have the benefit of the rituals and the ceremonial types of things that kind of automatically induce a trance for you. You have to do it yourself. All right, so how do you do this? Very simple. Lie down in a dark room. It's generally best to do this right before bed. So lay on your back on your bed, close your eyes, and then begin relaxing your body one body part at a time. And you want to begin here with relaxing the muscles of your face. Always start with the face. So to start with, relax the muscles of your jaw, then relax your scalp, the muscles at the top of your head. Then relax your eyelids, let them become loose and relaxed. Relax your cheek muscles, relax the inner muscles of your eyes, the muscles that control your eyeballs. And then once your face and head is completely relaxed, relax your neck muscles, and then go down and relax your left foot, then your left leg, relax your right foot, then your right leg, and then you work up to the rest of the body. Relax the muscles of the buttocks, groin, torso, belly, chest, lower back, mid back, upper back, shoulders, each arm, each hand. Now, this should take you maybe 5 or 10 minutes to do the first time you do this. Although as you get more practice at it, you'll be able to do it faster. I find now that I can run through this whole relaxation process in like a minute and I'm fully relaxed, fully receptive. When the body is completely relaxed in this way, when there's no muscular tension left at all, the mind is now primed for hypnotic induction. And you can say that to yourself to go into that mode. So as you're lying down, you've relaxed your whole body one part at a time. Afterwards, you say to yourself something like, you are now primed for hypnotic induction. And it feels different at this point. You'll feel the hypnotic trance in its early stages. It's difficult to put into words, but it's just very, very relaxed, very, very open, receptive. It's very similar to a meditative state in the sense that there are very few distracting thoughts now. Your mind is nice and empty, nice and clear, and it feels good. It's pleasant. It's a pleasant sensation. You might feel that your body is almost kind of tingling a bit. In the Monroe Institute, they call this Focus 10. They say it's a state characterized by body fully asleep, mind fully awake. They don't use terms from hypnosis, but if you've studied hypnosis at all, then you know that this state is simply the same as a light hypnotic trance. Focus 12, however, which is what we want to get into, is a deeper hypnotic trance. So how do we deepen the trance state? How do we go deeper into hypnosis? Well, a simple way you can use is with counting. So you can say to yourself in your mind, I'm now going to count slowly from 1 to 10. And with each number I count, you will become much more relaxed. So when I count 2, you'll become twice as relaxed as you are now. And you'll go 2 times deeper into trance. When I count 3, you'll become 3 times more relaxed, etc. So then you do that. You count up very slowly from 1 to 10. And each time you make yourself become 2 times more relaxed, 3 times more relaxed, 4 times more relaxed, etc. Now, by the time you get up to 10, you're going to be very, very relaxed. You're going to be in a deep trance. And this is what they call the Focus 12 state. You are now in touch with your full consciousness, including your subconscious, and the additional powers and resources that gives you. And I realize if you've never done this before, this can all seem like a big, long, complicated process, and it might be the first few times. But when you get used to doing this, you can actually run through it quite quickly. You can start putting yourself into deep trance in as little as a minute, 30 seconds even. In hypnosis, they call this fractionation. It refers to the fact that the more times you go into hypnosis, the easier and faster it is to get back there again. And that applies both within a single session and also over the long term. All right. So step 4 then is once you're in trance, once you're fully relaxed, now you want to focus your mind on that desire, that fantasy you want to experience that you decided on earlier, that wish you want to fulfill. And the key to this is, like I said, as you visualize that, as you imagine that fantasy image, you want to feel and imagine that the thing you're wishing for has already been achieved or is being achieved right now. It's already a matter of established achievement, as they put it in the CIA document. I think Neville Goddard once said something like this. When you're praying for something, thank God for giving you that thing. Like if you want a certain home, for example, and you obviously don't live there yet because you can't afford it, when you pray for it or visualize it, he said you should thank God with all your heart and with all the gratitude you can muster for giving you that home, as if you already live there, as if the wish has already been accomplished. And so now you're praying to God not to ask him to do you a favor, but rather to thank him in gratitude for a favor he's already given you. Again, like Jesus said, whatsoever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. Believe that you have received it. Feel as if you've achieved it. Be thankful and celebrate that it's yours. That's the mental frequency that you want to be in and that you want to bring to this. It's a much, much higher and more rarefied mental frequency than that of desire or craving or wanting, which obviously comes from a place of lack, of scarcity. So that is the system. That is the process. That is what they call patterning, this US military intelligence endorsed chaos magic technique for manifesting whatever you want, for altering physical reality with your thoughts. It does work in my experience. It is very, very effective. It's been very effective for me personally and attracting the kinds of women I want, really living an utterly spoiled lifestyle in terms of sexual options, getting all the sex I want, enjoying pretty much every material pleasure I've ever desired, to the point that I'm almost completely numb to it now. Now, I should mention here, this technique is going to be much, much more effective if you do all the other fundamentals we talk about in this channel, keeping healthy, lifting weights, eating good food, avoiding porn, avoiding masturbation. Having a robust daily spiritual practice is also going to massively multiply the power of this. For me, that's meditation. For some of you, it might be prayer. But that daily spiritual practice is really going to multiply your ability to achieve objectives in the physical world with your consciousness using this technique. So anyway, that is the technique. It's done a lot for me. I hope it will help you too. It's been very, very useful to me on my journey. It's good for not only manifesting things you want, which, like I said, believe it or not, actually does start to get kind of old after a while. But one of the things this technique does really, really well is it actually prepares you for more advanced forms of magic, like astral projection, accessing the astral plane, the collective unconscious, communicating with spirit guides, entities, communicating with the Jungian anima, knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. All that really, really good stuff that is part of the domain of the great work. Greater magic, which is focused on self-transformation and self-becoming, as opposed to lesser magic, which is focused more on getting stuff in the material plane. And once again, reminder before I go, make sure to download this free book I'm giving you today, The Ultimate Guide to Making Beautiful Women Approach You. This is free for you today with no catch. Just click the link below, put in your name and email, and I'll email you this free book right now. You'll also be subscribed to my newsletter. You'll get my best free content almost every day, stuff I can't post on YouTube. So make sure to do that right now. Click the button below and sign up to get your free book, and I'll see you on the astral plane.